It's been 3 months since the November ceasefire agreement. Where do you think we are now? Is there an opportunity to actually find a peaceful resolution to the Nagorno Karabakh conflict?
Okay, so one thing that wars do, wars are terrible, of course, and they should be avoided. They should definitely be avoided. But one thing that wars do is clarify the distribution of power between conflicting parties, and the disagreement about the distribution of power and the distribution of and the balance of resolve between the two parties is often the reason why parties to a conflict fail to come to terms peacefully, fail to agree to a peaceful resolution, and seek a resolution on the battlefield. So that disagreement is one of the fundamental theories about war in international relations theory is pointing exactly to this problem, which is disagreement about the resolve of the parties and the balance of power leading to conflict, making it impossible to reach a peaceful resolution. And what wars do is actually remove that disagreement, and after the war, everybody knows where the distribution of power is and what the balance of resolve is between the two parties. So, in that sense, I think the war has made it easier to come to terms, to find some kind of a resolution. But there are two ways to think about a resolution. So, one way to think about it would be okay, Armenia has been defeated, and a resolution can be imposed on the defeated party. And there is nothing that Armenia can do, Armenia and Karabakh can do to resist that. Given the outcome of the war, they would simply have to agree to whatever is imposed on them. That might still be the case, that might still happen, but and it might be the basis of a peace in the visible future, but I doubt that such a peace would be a genuine one and would be a durable one. In a different interview, or in fact in a couple of different interviews with Azerbaijani journalists, I've spoken about this as well. And my argument was that such an imposed peace might be too much like the peace that was imposed on Germany after World War One in 1918. And that was not really a peaceful resolution, but an armistice or a ceasefire for some period of time. Because after such an imposed peace, the same grievances will be nurtured, the same revanchist ideas will be popular, the same revanchist political forces and political movements will attract more sympathy in Armenia, and people will just bide their time and try to see if there is an opportune moment for turning the tables. And nobody knows what will happen down the road, and what opportunities may arise for the resumption of the conflict in the future. So I hope that's not the case, and that's not the kind of peace that is reached after this war. I hope there is an effort, there is an understanding of the dangers of such an imposed resolution, and instead I hope there is a genuine search for a more permanent, peaceful resolution that is stable and that removes the kind of incentives for revanchism in Armenia and for nurturing the same grievances. And such a possibility does exist, although I'm not sure we can confidently say that there is that there is evidence that parties are moving in this direction. I don't know if we can confidently say that Azerbaijan's behavior is evidence for a move towards such a resolution. Although, again, in my conversations with Azerbaijani journalists, they point out that Azerbaijan could have behaved a lot worse, and it has shown a degree of magnanimity, etc., etc. But I think that can be disputed. and there have been cases of severe mistreatment of POWs and hostage taking even after the war. President Ilham Aliyev's behavior on some occasions has not been, and some of his statements have not been indicative of such an attitude toward more accommodation and more genuine bridge building with Armenia. So it remains to be seen. I'm not saying that we can confidently say that Azerbaijan is behaving aggressively and is trying to take full advantage of this either. So the evidence is just not clear. But the point I'm trying to make is that if we are to have genuine peace, then it should not be one that is simply imposed on Armenia and Karabakh without taking into account their legitimate fears and grievances.
It was interesting for me to speak to an Azerbaijani academic a few months ago, and he actually argues that negotiations have always led nowhere and arbitration is what is necessary. But you're basically saying you totally disagree with that.
I don't know that Azerbaijani academic meant by arbitration. I mean, we've had um, so it, I'm assuming the idea is that there should be some kind of an arbitration of a resolution by third parties, which then will be imposed on both Armenia and Azerbaijan. I don't know. I don't know if that's uh, I don't know if that's in the works necessarily, if that's what they meant by it, or I don't know if that will make for a more peaceful resolution, for a more permanent and stable resolution. Because I think for a genuinely stable resolution, both Armenians and Azerbaijanis have to acquire incentives, positive incentives, to live with whatever status quo will be created after such a resolution. If it is imposed, it doesn't matter if it's Azerbaijan imposing on Armenia or third parties imposing on both Armenia and Azerbaijan, then the same old grievances are going to be nurtured, and it's not going to be the kind of environment that will be conducive to a stable peace, I think.
I mean, in a sense, the ceasefire agreement is being imposed, right? Pashinyan was in a very difficult situation. Although he could have agreed to end the war earlier, it seems, he had no choice but to. And I guess that in terms of what are the incentives for accepting that reality, it would be the opening up of economic and trade links.
I think it's a positive development, in fact. And I do think that it might contribute to the changing of atmosphere and the changing of incentives between the two countries and two societies. And I have elsewhere argued that if there is an attempt, in fact, to come up with a comprehensive resolution now, a comprehensive peace treaty which includes everything and which includes also the final status of Nagorno Karabakh, I think that is not likely. To have the kind of success that the parties might hope, because the grievances are too deep, and the fears and the hostilities are still very real, and the wounds are very fresh in both societies. And I think it would be probably wiser to begin with smaller moves and to give it time and to start learning to live with each other, to start learning to cooperate and to collaborate. And there should be a gradual reduction of this hostility first, and a lot of the efforts should be directed to that in the first stage. I think small steps are more important now, and that's what we should focus on. The idea that we can have a comprehensive solution now that will satisfy everybody is probably too much to hope for.
I mean, I tend to agree, and I've always felt that status of Nagorno Karabakh was the most difficult issue to overcome. And I often think that what will actually mirror more the situation in Cyprus. That people to people contact will resume, trade will resume, friendships will even emerge. But the fundamental issue is so difficult to resolve that it's going to take generations and probably a change in the dynamics of politics within both Armenia and Azerbaijan. For example, we don't know what a final status would be. Aliyev says there is no status, but that's impossible. Even as part of Azerbaijan, it will have to have some kind of status as a region or be split among regions or whatever. Liberidjian talks about a form of non territorial cultural
Mhm.
autonomy, for example. But that requires that democratization occurs in Azerbaijan, and I'm guessing that many people will be skeptical about that happening anytime soon.
Yes, there is the problem of Azerbaijan's lack of democracy and the kind of politics that we observe in Azerbaijan is not is not inspiring any hope that if the Azerbaijani government is not treating democratically its own citizens, its own Azerbaijani citizens, how would it be treating its Armenian citizens if Karabakh were to become part of Azerbaijan? It's a perfectly legitimate question. But even if Azerbaijan was democratic, I think at this stage, given what has happened over the last 30 years, given all the hostility that still exists, given all the mutual recrimination and the open wounds, I think hoping that it can we can easily transform the situation into one where Karabakh Armenians will just accept some kind of a status within Azerbaijan or become Azerbaijani citizens without even a status and just think that everything will be fine. It's just a chimera. I don't think Azerbaijanis can seriously think that it would be possible. Now, if a kind of brutal solution was imposed on the Armenian side, and Armenians would have to agree to something that completely reflects the Azerbaijani preferences, it cannot be ruled out given what has happened in the war. But again, the outcome of it might be the exodus of Armenians from Azerbaijan. This assumes that the Russian guarantee is not there anymore, and the Russian peacekeepers are out. So that would not be a resolution of any kind. Or it would not be a peaceful resolution of any kind. It would end with a kind of one-sided end to this conflict, with Karabakh Armenians essentially being expelled from there, or even if they are not expelled, I don't think Karabakh Armenians would agree to remain there under such circumstances.
One factor that appears to be a new one for me has been the
Mhm.
involvement of diaspora. I can't remember the diaspora being so agitated by the Nagorno Karabakh conflict in the past. And I have to wonder, or I actually believe that it's probably because of Turkey's involvement. How much of a factor do you think the diaspora will be to resolution of the Nagorno Karabakh conflict?
I don't think it will be too much of a factor, honestly. I think the diaspora's role in this has always been somewhat exaggerated. It certainly contributes to the mood in Armenia. It certainly sometimes, and I'm not. It's probably not even correct to speak about the diaspora as a whole. If we think about the diaspora mostly in terms of its activist element and its politically organized segments and the lobbying organizations and the parties, etc., they have. I mean, it's not. It's probably not inaccurate to say that they have contributed to the more hardline atmosphere in Armenia and as well as in the diaspora on the issue of Karabakh, on the issue of relations with Turkey. So what is going to be their role? Yeah, but having said that, I don't think it is correct to assign too much responsibility to the diaspora. If the Armenian government or successive governments in Armenia decided to move toward a peaceful resolution, I don't think the opposition from the diaspora would have been decisive in thwarting it. I don't think they could have done it. However, I think the diaspora organizations and some of the activist segment in the diaspora is still inclined toward I mean, the war does not seem to have changed much in their thinking. What happened in the fall of 2020 does not seem to have affected much in their thinking, unfortunately. And recently, I read an article in the Armenian Weekly by some diaspora activist who was arguing that the war should not change anything in our discourse and in our aspirations, and thinking that the war has revealed certain flaws in our prior thinking is just a mischaracterization, is a mistake. So we should stick to our guns. We should just not change anything in our politics and aspirations. But again, that's unfortunate. And I think that diaspora also needs some soul searching, to do some soul searching, and more of an intellectual pluralism, which has existed in Armenia since independence, but less so in the diaspora. And I think everybody who cares about the future of Armenia and the future of Karabakh should think more seriously about what this war has revealed, should think more seriously about what the limits of Armenians' power and capabilities are, the limits of what support Armenia can get from either the diaspora or other countries in pursuing such aspirations, and adjust things accordingly. And I think it's important for that process to take place in the diaspora, as some of it has been taking place in Armenia, as I said, since independence.
What happened was what Levon Petrosian had always warned of. And yet we don't seem to be hearing much of him these days, or anything at all. You just see a report that he's met with an ambassador, or he has spoken to a political figure, and that's about it. Why is he so pretty much invisible at the moment?
He's relatively quiet, and the political party that he's the leader of is also relatively passive and quiet, for a very simple reason. Now, first of all, I don't think they need to, thump their chests and say, "We told you so," and you know, we were right about the situation. Our analysis was correct, even without them saying it. I think most people in Armenia are now realizing that their Petrosian's message, their Petrosian's warnings, their Petrosian's analysis about the Karabakh conflict and the dangers of not resolving it were accurate. So, in some ways, I think it is wise of them not to pound on it too much. Now, the second reason for their relative silence is that after the November 9th ceasefire, the situation in Armenia was quite seriously dangerous, and there was a genuine fear that the situation might get out of control, that there could be political destabilization in Armenia. There was a fear that there might even be civil war. And one thing that nobody can deny is that Petrosian, in such situations, has always put the interests of the state and the society ahead of whatever political interests he personally may have had, or the political force he has led may have had. And he made a couple of statements where this concern was reflected, and I think his silence and the silence of the Armenian National Congress can be explained by that concern. by the desire not to contribute in any way to the deepening of the political crisis in Armenia and to to the destabilization. Now, as that danger becomes less pronounced, as that danger goes away, I am almost certain that Levon Petrosian and the Armenian National Congress will have a say. They will be a part of the political process. I don't think they can avoid that entirely, because I mean they are a political party that has had a specific approach to this problem, and I'm sure they have a lot to say about what Armenia should do in the future, how Armenia should proceed with regard to the negotiations with Azerbaijan, with regard to the relations with Turkey, etc., etc. So I think as the situation becomes more stable in the sense of reduced likelihood of a civil war or political destabilization, I'm sure Levon Petrosyan and the Armenian National Congress will speak out, will speak up.
I'd like to end on a more optimistic note. I watched one of your discussions where you mentioned the Sadaklo market, which unfortunately was closed. We've also heard some Azerbaijani officials talk about coexistence between ethnic Armenians and ethnic Azerbaijanis. And in Georgia, that's very much a reality. There are even co inhabited villages. I also see more young Azerbaijanis reach out to Armenians online, at least in my social bubble. So I do think there is the possibility for a peace to emerge. But there are, of course, obstacles. You also ended one of your presentations by talking about your Azerbaijani colleagues in academia, and I wondered if you could detail to what extent have you worked with Azerbaijani academics or discussed certain
Well,
issues and
it
so on.
wasn't an Azerbaijani colleague I have, but it was, I don't remember which presentation you're referring to. Maybe it was something having to do with a discussion with an Azerbaijani at a conference or something.
It was the Armenian Studies one. You ended by discussing that, saying that you knew people who were even in government who you could have a reasonable
Absolutely.
discussion with.
So, look, this is a very important issue and somewhat complicated, but an important issue to discuss. I think there is a perception, especially in the West, in the Western media, in Western academia, not only about the Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict, but conflicts of this kind in general, that the driving force in these conflicts is some kind of deeply ingrained mutual antagonism between these warring parties. Armenians and Azerbaijanis are fighting because of ancient hatreds and narratives about each other, religious identity, ethnic identity differences, etc., etc. I think that is just nonsense. I think the whatever antagonism exists between Armenians and Azerbaijanis is the consequence of their political disagreement regarding the status of Nagorno Karabakh. And had there been no such disagreement, Armenians and Azerbaijanis not only would have gotten along fine. I think Armenians and Azerbaijanis are very similar in many ways culturally, and in many ways they like very much the same things. And indeed, there is considerable evidence that at the interpersonal level, Armenians and Azerbaijanis have gotten along just fine, even during the war, as you point out, and as I pointed out in one of my interviews. There was this kind of interaction in the Sarakhlo market, and Armenians and Azerbaijanis live side by side in Georgia, and we don't have too many conflicts there. Now, having said that, I don't want also to go to the other extreme and say, well, look, public diplomacy and efforts to establish contacts between Armenians and Azerbaijanis and removing these hostile elements in our attitudes and narratives. While I think it is important, I don't think that's going to solve the problem. I think the problem is going to be solved at the state level. I think the problem is going to be solved when we have a stable resolution to the Karabakh conflict. And when that happens, indeed, I believe Armenians and Azerbaijanis will get along fine, and will be able to live side by side and cooperate as they have done in those villages in Georgia. So I do think at the same time that there are certain things that both societies need to do. There needs to be. I agree with you that there is more of an effort now to have contact, to have dialogue, and I think that's a positive sign. And that dialogue should deepen. I hope it will. And I think what two societies need to do is to develop some empathy for each other. And empathy should not be confused with sympathy and agreement with the other side, but at least there should be an effort on both sides to understand what the other side's feelings are, what the other side's grievances are, and to put yourself in the other side's shoes. I think that's an important element in this nascent dialogue, and these attempts to find common ground, and to be able to at least talk to each other. But again, unfortunately I'm a realist, and I think the conflict is about something very specific, which is the status of Nagorno Karabakh, which is the future of Nagorno Karabakh, and we should hope, we should try to find a solution to that conflict in order for a durable peace to be instituted between Armenians and Azerbaijanis. And again, some people may think that I'm contradicting myself, focusing on the resolution, even though I said we should start from small steps. There is no contradiction. We indeed should start from small steps, learn to cooperate with each other, learn to do trade and cultural exchanges, and create positive incentives. But ultimately, the Armenian-Azerbaijani conflict will be resolved permanently when we find a stable resolution to the Nagorno Karabakh conflict, and then the issue of the status of Nagorno Karabakh.